Mr. Silly by Roger Hargraves. Mr. Silly lives in Nonsense Land, which is a very funny place to live. You see, in Nonsense Land, everything is as silly as can be. In Nonsense Land, the trees are red and the grass is blue. Is that silly? In Nonsense Land, ducks wear hats, and you know how birds fly in Nonsense Land? No, they don't fly forwards, they fly backwards. It really is a very silly place indeed, which of course is why Mr. Silly lives there. Mr. Silly, in fact, lives in quite the silliest looking house you have ever seen in your whole life. Have you ever seen a sillier looking house than that? Now, the spectacle story is about the Nonsense Cup. You see, in Nonsense Land, each year they hold a competition, and the cup is awarded to whatever has the silliest idea of the year. Mr. Silly have never won the cup, but each night, lying in his bed, he dreamed about winning it. In order to win the Nonsense Cup, Mr. Silly realized that he would have to think of something remarkably silly. He pondered over the problem one morning at breakfast, and endlessly. You may be interested to know what Mr. Silly was having for breakfast. He was having a cup of coffee, which he put a spoonful of marmalade into. And after that he had a cornflake sandwich. After to finish he had a boiled egg, but being Mr. Silly he ate the shell as well. Isn't that a silly breakfast? Anyway, the practical breakfast time, Mr. Silly was thinking how to win the cup. To remember 2 years ago, the cup was won by Mr. Ridiculous. He won by playing his house, which sounds very ordinary, but in fact, Mr. Ridiculous had wallpaper at the outside of his house. And Mr. Silly remembered last year when Mr. Foolish won the cup. Mr. Foolish, who was a friend of Mr. Silly's, had won the cup by inventing a car. It was quite a normal car. Apart from one thing, it had square wheels. Is that silly? Mr. Silly thought and thought and thought and thought, but it was not good. He even had another cup of coffee with marmalade, but that didn't help either. So he decided to take a walk. Off he went, leaving his front door open so that he wouldn't have burglars when he was out. On his walk, Mr. Silly met a chicken wearing Wellington boots and carrying an umbrella. Would it be silly if you didn't wear Wellington boots and carry an umbrella? He said to the chicken. Meow, said the chicken, because animals Nonsense Land don't make the same noises as they do in your country. On his walk, Mr. Silly met a worm wearing a top hat, monocle, and an old school tie. Would it be silly if you didn't wear a top hat and monocle and all the school tie? He said to the worm. Quack, quack, said the worm. Next, Mr. Silly met a pig wearing trousers and a bowler hat. Would it be silly if you didn't wear trousers and a bowler hat? He asked the pig. No, said the pig. Is that silly? It's the middle of Mr. Silly's walk that he had his idea. It was a beautifully silly idea. Ding ding! Got the silliest idea he's never ever had. He hurried into town and bought himself a pot of paintbrush. Today, after the great awarding of the Nonsense Cup arrived, a huge crowd assembled in the city square of the sea was going to win the cup. The king of Nonsense Land mounted a special plenary. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the crowd in the city square, it's my pleasure today so award the Nonsense Cup to whatever has had the silliest idea of the year. One of the silliest ideas of the year, continued the king, is by Mr. Model the farmer. He has managed to grow, of all things, a square apple. The crowd clapped, and the square apple was held up by Mr. Model for everybody to see. He felt sure he was going to win. However, said the king, and Mr. Model's face fell. We had an ever sillier idea other than my nest cup. It was a teapot, quite the silliest teapot it ever been. The crowd broke into thunderous applause. A cheerful of great pleasures, echoed the king, and presenting the nonsense cup too. Just then he looked up and stopped in an amazement. Now, in the middle of the city square, there is a tree. It's always been tree, and it was a tree that the king was looking at amazement. What? He cried. Has happened to that tree? Everything turned to look. The tree had green leaves, red green leaves. Not red leaves like all the trees in Nonsense Land, but green. There was a Mr. Sillians. It was me, piped up Mr. Silly. I painted all the leaves green last night when you were all asleep. A green tree, ended the tree. Wherever heard of a green tree? A green tree? Said the Missouri. How silly! And they started to applaud. Mr. Silly smiled modestly. The king held up his hands. I think, he said, that is the silliest idea I have ever heard of, and therefore I want a nonsense cup of Mr. Silly. The crowd cheered and cheered. Mr. Silly went pink with pride, and the bird perched high up in the branches of the silly green tree looked down. Woof, it said, and flew off backwards. Ha ha, no. Mr. Silly is not out everybody to talk.